Hey guys, it's Robbie. Let's cut to the chase. So, in my Beginner's Guide to Blackgaze video, I mentioned that Alcest and Deafheaven were the two most influential bands in the genre. I've already made a video about Deafheaven, so today it seemed only fitting to give Alcest some love too. Today, we're gonna take a deep dive into the most popular French band that isn't Gojira, Daft Punk, or Phoenix. This is a beginner's guide to Alcest. Alcest was formed in the year 2000 in Bagnols-sur-Cèze, France. The first lineup consisted of Stephane Neige, paut on vocals, rhythm guitar, and drums, Ignore on lead guitar, and Argoth on bass. Fun fact, Neige was only 15 when he started the band. In 2001, they released the 4-song demo Tristesse hivernale. While Alcest would later become known for pioneering the Blackgaze genre, this release is straight up raw black metal. I'm not going to talk about it since, well, there just really isn't anything to discuss. It's definitely well-written lo-fi black metal, so if that's your thing, check it out. Shortly after the demo came out, Ignore and Argoth both departed, leaving Neige to continue the group as a solo project. It would be 4 years before the next release under the Alcest name. In 2005, Neige put out the Les Secrets EP. This was a release where Alcest found their sound, in my opinion. Neige combines shoegaze dreaminess and black metal intensity in a way that no one had really done before. The utilization of both clean and unclean vocals is what really helps this EP stand out. Neige is not only good at anguished shrieks, but his singing voice is really gentle and beautiful. I will admit that if you view the release separately from its musical influence, it's not an incredibly well-written piece of music. The songs do definitely drag quite a bit, with the 2 tracks being the longest songs Alcest has ever recorded. That being said, the seeds were sown for something special. In 2007, Neige released the first full-length album under the Alcest name, Souvenirs d'un Autre Monde. This release acts as a more fleshed-out version of the ideas that first appear on Les Secrets. The songs are more concise, which is a much-needed change. Plus, the fact that this is a full album rather than just an EP means that there's just a whole lot more to enjoy. This album definitely leans more into the shoegaze side of things. The vocals are almost exclusively sung, and there's even some slight folk influences, as demonstrated by the presence of acoustic guitar on several tracks, especially on the closing track, Tir Nanog, which is straight up Celtic folk. As good of an album as it is, it's held back mainly by the fact that Neige is very clearly just finding his footing in the style of music. The album cover is certainly fitting, since the music feels like Neige has so much more growing to do, musically speaking. In addition, the album is almost too precious for its own good. This is both in reference to the songwriting, which can be overly beautiful at times, and the production, which does feel a bit too polished. Still, this album is definitely a good listen. My favorite tracks are Souvenirs d'un Autre Monde, Les Iris, and Sur l'autre rive j'attendrai. A bit of a warning, this video is going to feature a lot of butchered French pronunciation on my part, so sorry about that. After this album came out, Neige spent time working on his side project, Alcest. They played a style of blackgaze that featured a heavy post-punk and industrial influence, almost like Joy Division, but living in late 2000s France. Due to internal conflicts, they only did release a single self-titled album, one that I heavily encourage all of you to check out. In the aftermath of the breakup, Alcest's drummer Jean Winterhalter de Flandre decided to join Alcest, allowing Neige to focus on vocals and songwriting. Also around this time, Neige relocated from Bagnols-sur-Cèze to the City of Light itself, Paris. Did the new environment give him extra creative motivation? Maybe, maybe not. But if so, it would definitely explain what he did next with Alcest. Now acting as a duo, Alcest released their second album, Écailles de Lune, in 2010. Where do I begin with this album? I said that Neige was finding his footing on Souvenirs d'un Autre Monde. Well, to say Neige found his footing on this album is an understatement. Neige hits it out of the park as far as songwriting goes, putting out an album that not only avoids a sophomore slump, but sets a standard that Alcest still has not reached again, in my opinion. One of the most noticeable differences between this album and Souvenirs is that the songs are much more intense. The riffs are still definitely ethereal, but they're not as overly beautiful as they previously were. The increased intensity is also accomplished by the greater use of screamed vocals. Speaking of the vocals, they're mixed a lot better than they were on Souvenirs, where they sounded a bit overpowering. The production overall just feels a lot more human. All of the songs on this album are killer, but my favorite tracks are Écailles de Lune Part 2, which has one of the most powerful riffs Alcest has ever written, and Sur l'océan couleur de fer, which has one of the most beautiful riffs Alcest has ever written. Also, for what it's worth, this album has my favorite cover artwork of all time. Just look at it. Shortly after this album came out, they began playing live shows. In order to not depend on backing tracks, they hired Pierre Zero Corson on guitar and Indria Sare on bass. These two members have remained on board as live musicians ever since. They're the reason it's even possible to enjoy Alcest's music live, and while I haven't been able to do that yet, unfortunately, from the clips I've seen, they've done a pretty good job. Alcest would release their third album, Voyages de Lâme, in 2012. This album is definitely an interesting listen. It borrows from both Souvenirs and Écailles in different ways. As far as style goes, it's more similar to Souvenirs in that it leans more into the shoegaze side of things. The album sounds like sunshine, if that makes sense. However, it's not as polished as Souvenirs is, with the production sounding more human, definitely more akin to Écailles. This album is a great example of how production can make or break an album, since this record would have been a lot less enjoyable if it had been recorded differently. The album also features Autre Monde, their first music video, and up until a few years ago, their most listened to song on Spotify. The songs do definitely drag at points, with this being the longest album Alcest have ever put out at 50 minutes. Moreover, this album kind of suffers from a problem a lot of albums have, being that the songs themselves are really good, but one after another they start to sound kind of samey. The tracks certainly work best when listened to individually. My favorite songs are La Hivernale couleur nouvelle, Nous sommes les maraudes, and Faiseurs des mondes. In 2014, Alcest released Shelter. On this album, they abandoned any hint of black metal influence in favor of a purely shoegaze and dream pop sound. I don't really know how to talk about this album because honestly, it doesn't really feel like an Alcest record. I enjoy straight up shoegaze music, but I don't listen to Alcest for that. If I wanted straight up shoegaze, I'd listen to Slowdive. Speaking of Slowdive, their singer, Neil Halstead, has a guest appearance on this album, which is pretty cool, I guess. The songs themselves are alright. I will give neige credit, and he definitely knows how to write enjoyable shoegaze music. However, the music is lacking memorability. I remember listening to the album for the first time, thinking that it was decent, and then forgetting all of the riffs by the next day. Upon repeat listening, I would say the tracks I enjoy the most are Opal, Délivrance, and Away. Just to clarify, I'm not trying to say that this is an objectively bad album. It certainly has its moments, and my harshing on it is definitely due to my personal taste. This is also the last album of theirs to have gotten a review on Pitchfork, so it's unfortunate to see that such an esteemed and highbrow outlet has given up on the band. Oh well. In 2016, Alcest released Kodama. After the left turn that was Shelter, Kodama is a smashing return to form for the group. Neige said that he was heavily inspired by Japanese culture while writing the album, hence why he named it after Kodama, the Japanese tree spirits in their folklore. Moreover, he also claimed to have been inspired by Hayao Miyazaki's animated film, Princess Mononoke. I feel like a Western band writing a metal album inspired by anime could have turned out really good or really bad. And luckily, this one turned out really good. I'll admit right away that this is the first Alcest album I was ever exposed to, so I'm pretty biased in favor of it just for old time's sake. Stylistically, Kodama isn't too different from anything Alcest had done before, with one obvious exception, but somehow it just works. The songwriting on this album manages to perfectly walk the line between soft and powerful, making for a truly dreamlike listen. There are moments where it almost falls into the trap of being too beautiful, such as on the title track, but it luckily never goes too far. The album feels a lot more compact than the others have. The album has 6 tracks, 4 songs, and 2 interludes, and it all flows very well. An interesting new thing on this album is that, on the aforementioned title track, Neige's vocals don't have any lyrics. He's just singing nonsense syllables. This is something that Cocteau Twins did in the 1980s, and that was again popularized by Sigur Rós in the 2000s. It's interesting to hear him do it. When in doubt, gibberish. My favorite tracks on this album are Éclosion, Je suis d'ailleurs, and the absolutely breathtaking Oiseau de proie. In 2019, Alcest released their most recent album, Spiritual Instinct. Like Kodama, it doesn't seek to do anything that Alcest hasn't done before, and that's totally fine. Alcest have found their niche and they're sticking to it. Neige also does bring back the gibberish vocals on the song Sapphire, which is a cool feature. The album also has what I would say is the best single they've ever put out, Protection. I remember listening to it 4 months before the album came out when it was first released and just being blown away. It truly is an absolutely pounding tune. And one thing holding this album back is, aside from some highlights, the songwriting itself isn't exactly on par with what they've done in the past. Don't get me wrong, the songs are still really enjoyable and it's not forgettable in any way. The album as a whole is just missing that spark that albums like Écailles de Lune and Kodama have. As I said though, it's still a very good listen. Given that this is their most recent album, I haven't listened to it as much as I've listened to their other stuff, so that's definitely factoring into how I'm talking about it. My favorite songs on this album are Protection, Sapphire, and L'Île des Morts. As of August of this year, Alcest have finished writing the drums for a new album and are working on the other instruments and lyrics, according to an Instagram post by Neige. I have no idea how far along they've gotten since then, but given how long the writing can take, and that's saying nothing about recording, I would estimate we can expect to see the new album around, let's say, April or May. When it does come out, expect a video about it. So there you have it. Alcest, in my opinion, have never released a bad album per se. Even the one album that I enjoyed the least would still be a good listen to someone who prefers that kind of sound. I would suggest starting out with either Écailles de Lune or Kodama, since those are, in my opinion, the best examples of their sound. From that point, you can explore the rest of their albums any way you want and form your own opinions. If you want, you can even check out the Tristesse hivernale demo if you've exhausted the rest of their discography and want to hear what 16-year-old Neige was writing back before he discovered happiness. No matter what your favorite release ends up being, I would love for you to check out Alcest. If they're not your thing, well, at least you tried something new. If you're still watching by this point, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me your time. If you like what you saw, be sure to like and hit subscribe. I upload videos whenever I can, and I always have a ton of fun making them. Hopefully, you have a ton of fun watching them. If you have a suggestion for a video you want me to do, leave it down in the comments. Who knows, maybe I'll get to it. I'm RobbieJ2734. I will see you when I see you next.